The scream cut through the forest like a knife. It was thin, high, and trembling, the kind of sound that freezes a person mid-step, the kind that makes even seasoned officers go still. Sheriff Tom Harlow lifted his hand, signaling his deputies to stop. The night was damp, the air heavy with the smell of pine and wet dirt. But under all that, there it was again. A cry. Not an animal, not the wind, a child. "Did you hear that?" Deputy Miller whispered, swallowing hard. Sheriff Harlow didn't answer. His jaw tightened, his flashlight sweeping across the narrow trail cutting through Briar Ridge Forest. They'd been searching for 3 hours, following reports of someone wailing in the woods. Teenagers claimed they heard it during a late-night bonfire, but no one took them seriously, not at first. Kids lied. Kids exaggerated. Kids wanted attention. But then the calls increased. Adults heard it. Campers heard it. Even old Mrs. Durham, who lived alone in a cabin off the highway, said the cry was enough to make your bones turn cold. So now the sheriff and his team were here, trudging through the forest with flashlights, weapons, and rising dread. Another cry echoed, sharper this time. Sheriff Harlow froze. "That's close," he muttered. The deputies exchanged looks, tense, uncertain. But then something else sliced into the moment. From behind them, a shout, deep, angry. "Don't go in there! That's private property!" They turned to find Ronald Briggs, the landowner, stomping toward them with a shotgun slung over his arm. Big man, red face, alcohol on his breath, and a history of making trouble. Sheriff Harlow stepped forward. "This is an active emergency call, Ronald. We've got reports of a child in distress." Briggs shoved a finger toward the tree line. "No kid out here. You cops just want to make yourselves heroes," he snorted, blocking the path like a stubborn bull. "Besides, you ain't got a warrant." Deputy Miller spoke softly. "Sir, we're hearing it ourselves." Briggs scoffed. "You ain't hearing nothing but raccoons." Then, as if to spite him, the cry came again. Louder, longer, pain-filled. Sheriff Harlow didn't hesitate. He brushed past Briggs, who tried to grab his shoulder. "You step 1 foot on my land and—" Harlow turned slowly, eyes cold as steel. "Threaten my deputies again, and you'll be spending the night in a cell instead of your recliner." Briggs faltered, anger collapsing into something closer to fear. Harlow was a respected sheriff, former Army Ranger, 32 years on the force, known for tracking lost hikers even in the worst winters. He wasn't a man you argued with when a child might be in danger. "Move," Harlow ordered. Briggs stepped aside, muttering. The deputies followed the sheriff deeper into the trees. The night grew darker, the foliage thicker. Leaves crackled beneath their boots as they moved in a line, listening, searching, breathing hard. "Sheriff," Miller whispered. "Why would Briggs lie? He looked scared." "Men like him," Harlow murmured, "are only scared of their own secrets." The cry pierced the night again. Closer, much closer. The officers moved faster, flashlights sweeping the forest floor. The trees thinned, revealing a clearing swallowed in mist. In the center stood an old wooden shed, crooked, rotting, its roof sagging like a beaten animal. Harlow lifted a hand. The team stopped. The cry drifted from inside, more desperate than ever. Deputy Ross crossed himself. "That's no raccoon." "No, it isn't." Harlow approached the shed slowly, carefully. The hinges rusted, the door padlocked, chains wound tightly, as if someone wanted to keep something in, not out. "Sheriff," Miller breathed, "you think Briggs?" "I don't think, I fear." The cry rose again, heartbreaking, terrified, indesperately human. Harlow's voice hardened. "Bolt cutters, now." Deputy Ross dropped his pack, fumbling with the cutters. His hands shook, whether from cold or dread, none of them could tell. He passed them to Harlow. The sheriff positioned the cutters around the lock. A pause. A breath. Then, snap. The lock broke. The chains fell like dead snakes to the ground. Harlow gripped the handle, his pulse pounding in his ears. Behind him, the deputies steadied their flashlights and weapons, faces pale. "On my count," Harlow whispered. 3, 2, One. He tore open the door. The smell hit them first. Rot, dampness, something metallic, like blood. Their flashlights sliced through the darkness inside. What they saw made Ross gasp. Miller covered his mouth. Harlow's grip tightened around his light. There, in the far corner, curled up in a blanket of dirt and leaves, was a child, no older than 3, barefoot, bruised, shivering, and clutching something to their chest. Something alive, something breathing, something the sheriff couldn't see yet. But as the child lifted their tear-streaked face toward the light, their next words shattered every man in that clearing. "Please, please don't let him come back." And then the forest went completely silent. The flashlight beams trembled as they cut across the inside of the shed. Dust filled the air in thick swirls, drifting like frightened ghosts as the officers stepped inside. The child recoiled instantly, pulling their knees tighter to their chest, arms wrapped protectively around the small bundle they held. Sheriff Harlow slowly lowered himself to one knee, not close, not touching, just low enough to seem less threatening. "Hey there," he said gently. His voice softened in a way that startled even his deputies. "You're safe now. We're not here to hurt you." The child flinched at the sound of the sheriff's voice and pressed their cheek to the small blanket-wrapped object they clung to. The trembling in their tiny shoulders told the sheriff more than words ever could. This wasn't a kid who'd been lost. This was a kid who'd been hidden. Deputy Ross swallowed. "Sheriff, look." He pointed his flashlight toward the opposite wall. Deep scratch marks gouged into the wooden boards. Small ones, uneven, desperate, the kind made by tiny fingernails. The sheriff's stomach turned. Halo raised a calming hand toward his men. "Don't say anything," he murmured. "Not yet. We don't know what this little one's been through." He shifted slightly, lowering his flashlight so the beam wasn't hitting the child directly. "What's your name?" Halo asked softly. The child didn't respond. They just shook their head and buried their face deeper into the blanket. "It's okay," he whispered. "You don't have to talk, but I want you to know, whoever hurt you isn't here anymore. You're with us now." The child's grip tightened around the bundle. Sheriff Harlow leaned a little closer, careful and slow. "What's that you're holding there?" The child hesitated, then slightly lifted the blanket. Inside was a tiny dog, a puppy, barely 4 months old, shivering violently but alive. Miller gasped. "Holy, it's just a baby." Harlow gently nodded. "Both of them are." The child spoke then, the first words they dared to form. "He kept hitting her," the child whispered, voice cracked from crying. "He said she barked too much. I tried to make her quiet, but she was scared." Tears welled in the sheriff's eyes before he could stop them. Not from shock, not from anger, from heartbreak. He had kids once, long grown now, with lives of their own, but he still remembered that vulnerable, trembling fear a child could feel, and the terrible silence that followed it. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked again, his voice barely above a breath. The child licked her dry lips. "Lily." "Hi, Lily," he whispered. "I'm Sheriff Harlow." Lily blinked at him, actually looked at him. Her eyes, glassy and red from crying, flickered with a tiny spark of trust. Fragile, breakable. "Lily, can I check you and your puppy? Make sure you're okay?" She clutched the dog tighter. "Don't take her, please. She'll be good. She won't bark, I promise." "No one's taking her," Harlow said immediately. "She stays with you. I promise you that." Lily finally loosened her hold on the dog just a little. Deputy Miller stepped forward with his jacket, moving slowly. "It's cold out here. You both need this more than I do." Lily flinched when he approached. The puppy whimpered. Harlow subtly extended an arm to block Miller from getting too close. The deputies met his eyes.
They understood. Trust wasn't something that could be forced, it had to be earned. "Lily," Harlow said softly, "that man outside, Ronald Briggs, did he hurt you?" Her entire body went rigid. She shook her head quickly, too quickly. "No, no, we don't talk about him," Ross muttered under his breath. "Jesus." Harlow shot him a silencing glance. "Lily," Harlow murmured, "how long have you been in here?" She bit her lip so hard it bled. "I don't know." "Was it days?" Lily shrugged helplessly. "It's dark a lot." Sheriff Harlow's jaw clenched. "Days, a toddler and a puppy, locked in a shed, on another man's property, and Briggs tried to stop officers from coming out here." Harlow's instinct screamed. "We need EMS," Miller whispered. "Now." "Radio it in," Harlow responded without taking his eyes off Lily. "Tell them we have a minor with possible physical trauma, malnutrition, and psychological distress." Ross raised his radio and moved toward the door. The moment Ross stepped out into the clearing, Lily jolted. "No, no, don't go outside. He's out there." The sheriff leaned in. "Lily, who? Ronald Briggs?" She nodded hard, her tangled hair whipped across her face. Harlow exhaled slowly. So she was afraid of Briggs, which meant she wasn't supposed to be found. He turned to Miller. "Get a blanket from the truck. We'll carry her out gently." Miller nodded. On it. But the moment he moved toward the door, Lily clutched the edges of her puppy's blanket and shrieked, "No! Don't open it! He'll hear! He'll hear!" Her scream ricocheted through the shed like lightning. Raw fear, not tantrum or confusion. Harlow immediately raised both hands. Okay, he soothed. "We won't leave yet. No one's leaving you alone." Lily trembled violently, breathing fast and shallow. "Lily," Harlow asked carefully, "did he tell you not to make noise?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He said if I heard me cry, he'd take her away." Her arms wrapped protectively around the puppy again. "And if I made any noise, he'd put me in the other place." The deputies froze. Miller whispered, "Other place? What other place?" But Lily shut down instantly. Head bowed, eyes squeezed shut, shaking. The sheriff swallowed the anger burning in his chest. "We're not going to let anyone take you anywhere," he said firmly. "I promise you that." Outside, the sound of footsteps approached, running footsteps. "Sheriff! Harlow, you need to see this." Harlow stood up slowly, but Lily grabbed his pant leg, eyes wide with terror. "Don't leave me here, please." He crouched again. "I'm not going far," he promised. "I'll be right outside that door. You'll still see me." She didn't let go. The puppy whimpered. He gently pried her fingers loose, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. He stepped outside, and the night air cut across his face like a slap. Ross pointed at something on the ground, half buried near the foundation of the shed. Harlow kneeled, brushing away the dirt. His breath caught. It was a small shoe, a child's shoe, tiny, red, mud-covered, and it wasn't Lily's. Harlow stood up slowly. "We need to search this entire property," he said, voice like steel cracking. "Now." Deputy Miller stepped out beside him. "Harlow, what if Lily wasn't the only one?" Harlow looked toward the dark woods stretching beyond the shed. His voice was barely above a breath. "Then God help us all."
Sheriff Harlow stood frozen, staring at the tiny red shoe in his hands. It weighed nothing, yet felt heavier than any evidence he'd ever held. As he brushed more dirt away, Deputy Ross stiffened. "Sheriff," Ross whispered hoarsely, "there's something else." Harlow followed his deputy's gaze to the soft earth beneath the shed window. At first it looked like any other patch of disturbed soil, but then the flashlight hit it at just the right angle. A footprint. Small, bare,
fresh, indefinitely not Lily's. Harlow's heartbeat thudded in his ears. How recent? Ross crouched down. The rain ended 2 hours ago, he murmured. Print hasn't filled back in. I'd say whoever made this was here less than an hour. Miller swore under his breath. So someone else, another kid, was out here while we were inside with Lily? Harlow didn't answer. His mind raced. The footprint wasn't just small. It pointed away from the shed, toward the woods. Deep woods. He straightened slowly. We need a full sweep, now. The deputies dispersed, flashlights slicing through the trees. Branches cracked under their boots as they pushed deeper, calling out carefully. But Harlow remained still. He glanced back at the shed. Through the narrow gap of the half-open door, Lily's small face peered out, terrified but curious. Her puppy trembled in her lap. She looked like she wanted to speak, but fear wrapped around her like invisible chains. "Sheriff?" Miller called softly from the tree line. "You're going to want to see this too." Harlow approached. The deputy pointed at the ground again. Another set of prints. But these weren't from a child. These were from boots. Large ones, heavy, deeply pressed, leading from the shed into the dark. Harlow's chest tightened. Briggs, he muttered. He was out here. He was watching. Miller's jaw tightened. So why did he leave one kid behind and take the other? Maybe he didn't get the chance, Ross replied. Maybe the second kid ran. Ran where? Miller snapped. It's the middle of the night, freezing, and these woods stretch for miles. The sheriff didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the direction the prints led. Straight into the thickest part of the forest. Ross shifted uneasily. "Sheriff, we should call for backup. Canine units, search dogs, air support. This is turning into something big." But before Harlow could answer, Lily's small voice drifted out from the shed. "She tried." The men turned. Lily stood framed in the doorway, clutching the puppy, her silhouette small and shaking against the lantern light inside. Harlow approached slowly. "Who tried, Lily?" She swallowed hard. "Ellie." "Ellie?" the sheriff repeated. "Is that her name?" Lily nodded once. "She's smaller than me. She gets scared faster." Sheriff Harlow lowered himself to eye level again. "Lily, was Ellie here with you?" A tear slid down Lily's cheek. "We were together, always together." "Where is she now, sweetheart?" he asked softly. Lily lifted her trembling hand and pointed into the forest. "She ran when he yelled. He said if she didn't stop crying, he'd put her in the dark place." Harlow exchanged a horrified look with his deputies. "Lily," he whispered, "what is the dark place?" Her whole body stiffened. Her eyes went distant, like she was falling back into a memory she tried desperately to forget. "He locks it from the outside," she whispered. "There's no light. You can hear animals scratching and water dripping, and her voice cracked. "He told us if we ever ran, he'd put us in there forever." The wind rustled through the trees, cold, unforgiving. Miller tightened his grip on his flashlight. "That's sick." Harlow raised a hand sharply. It wasn't the time for anger, not now. "Lily," he said, "did Ellie run tonight, right before we got here?" She nodded. "Did Briggs chase her?" "No," said Lily. "He yelled, he threw something, then she ran. Then he came for me." Harlow exhaled. "So Ellie is alone in the woods," he said quietly. "With no shoes," Ross added. "And probably terrified," Miller whispered. "And Briggs?" Harlow asked. "Where did he go?" Lily's lower lip quivered. "He said, 'Don't you move.' Then he left. I think he went after Ellie. I don't know." The sheriff stood. "All right, we're bringing her out. She's coming with us while we search." Lily shook her head violently, backing into the shed. "No, no, please. If he sees me, if he finds me." Sheriff Harlow gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "He's not going to find you. Not tonight, not ever again if I can help it." She looked up at him, trembling so hard the puppy stirred. "You promise?" she whispered. "With my life." That seemed to be enough. She allowed Harlow to bundle her in a blanket and lift her gently into his arms. The puppy curled into her chest, whimpering softly. As he carried her out into the clearing, she whispered something the sheriff almost didn't catch. "Ellie always hides near water because she says the sound helps her breathe." Harlow froze. "Water?" Ross repeated. "The creek?" Harlow's eyes shot toward the direction the prince pointed. The woods dipped downward there, toward Boulder Creek. "If Ellie went that way," he murmured, calculating the terrain in his mind, "she could be along the bank. Or worse," Ross said quietly, "she could be in the water." Harlow's chest thudded painfully. "Ross, go radio for a full search team. Canine units, drones, thermal, everything. Miller, get floodlights from the truck and set up a base here. We're not losing her. Not on my watch." The men scattered instantly. Harlow positioned Lily gently inside the patrol vehicle, buckling her in like she was made of glass. "Stay here," he murmured. "You're safe." But Lily grabbed his sleeve. "Sheriff, if he finds Ellie first—" Harlow looked her in the eyes. "He won't." "How do you know?" He took a slow breath. "Because we already found something he didn't want us to know." Lily blinked. "What?" "The footprint," he said quietly. "He never meant for anyone to know she was here." Her eyes widened, and she whispered the words that turned the sheriff's blood cold. "There aren't just two of us." Harlow froze. Lily looked down at her puppy, voice tiny as a snowflake. "There were 4 of us." A ringing silence fell through the clearing. Miller nearly dropped the floodlights. Ross stumbled as he returned. "4?" Ross echoed, stunned. "Sheriff?" Harlow lifted a hand, but his composure was hanging by a thread. Lily nodded, eyes filling with tears. "You found Ellie's print, but you haven't found Ben's or Kara's." "Ben? Kara? How old are they?" Lily hugged the puppy. "Ben is 3, she whispered. Ross's face drained of color. "And Kara?" Lily's voice was barely audible. "She can't walk yet." The forest suddenly felt darker, colder, infinite. Behind them, the wind rustled the branches as if something was moving out there, watching, waiting. Sheriff Harlow straightened slowly, jaw clenched. "We search," he said, voice shaking with rage. Lily reached for his hand again. "Sheriff?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Please hurry. Before he puts them in the dark place."
The woods swallowed sound. Not even the wind dared move as Sheriff Harlow stepped into the tree line, his flashlight slicing through the dense undergrowth. The beam quivered slightly, not from his hand, but from the adrenaline pounding in his veins. 4 children. Not 1, 4. 1 missing was already a nightmare. 4 meant hell. Miller and Ross trailed behind him, breath visible in the cold air, their boots sinking into damp earth. "There's no way he got far," Miller whispered. "Not if he's carrying the younger one." "Briggs knows these woods," Harlow said quietly, "better than any of us." Ross glanced around nervously. "Sheriff, what if he doubled back? What if he circled behind the shed?" Harlow shook his head. "Briggs is many things. Stupid isn't one of them. He's running to wherever he kept them. He swallowed thickly. "The dark place." The words tasted rotten. Behind them, distant voices echoed as more deputies set up floodlights near the shed. Radios crackled, search dogs barked, helicopter rotors thumped faintly overhead. But out here, deep in the forest, it felt like they were alone, or being watched. Harlow's flashlight landed on the second footprint again, the child's, small toes pressed into the mud, pointing toward the creek. "Ellie came this way," Harlow murmured. "She couldn't have gone far."
Miller swept his light across the ground. She must be terrified, running barefoot like that at night. God. Harlow crouched, breathing deeply. He wasn't just hunting a man. He was racing against fear, cold, exhaustion, in a monster who had stolen 4 innocent children. He rose slowly. "Check every inch," he ordered. "No noise. Briggs hears us. He'll grab those kids and vanish deeper. We don't give him the chance." The men nodded. They moved silently, pushing through thick brush and brambles, searching for any sign, broken branches, disturbed moss, scraps of fabric. Then Ross stopped abruptly. "Sheriff, over here." Harlow rushed to him. Ross pointed to a tree trunk. A small smear of something dark glistened under the flashlight. Blood. Sheriff Harlow's jaw clenched. "Is it fresh?" Ross touched it gently. Still wet. Miller knelt. Heights low. Could be from a kid. Harlow felt his stomach twist. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. "Ellie," he whispered. A rustle echoed through the trees. All 3 men snapped up, guns drawn, flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Who's there?" Harlow barked. Silence. Then another rustle, this time behind them. Miller spun around. "Movement! 10 o'clock!" "Hold your fire!" Harlow hissed. He slowly stepped forward, heart pounding. Leaves shifted. A small shape trembled behind a fallen log. Harlow lowered his gun instantly. "Ellie?" he whispered. A tiny face peeked out, dirt-streaked, eyes wide with terror. She looked even younger than Lily, barefoot, shivering violently. "Ellie." When she saw the sheriff, she flinched backward, body curling protectively. "No," she whimpered, shaking her head so hard her tangled hair whipped across her face. "No, you're not. He'll find me." "No, he won't," Harlow said firmly. "Not tonight." Ellie crawled closer, tears spilling silently. "He said he'll put me in the hole. I don't want to go in the hole again." Sheriff Harlow felt his throat tighten painfully. Miller looked away, swallowing hard. Ross crouched beside her. "You don't ever have to go back there," he murmured. "We promise." Ellie sniffled, nodding hesitantly. Then her eyes widened with panic. "Ben and Kara, he took them. Sheriff, he took them deeper." Harlow steadied her trembling hands. "Where did he take them, Ellie? Do you know?" Ellie pointed deeper into the woods, toward the creek. "Near the water, there's a door in the ground." Harlow's blood ran cold. A cellar, a bunker, the dark place. Harlow arose abruptly. "Miller, get Ellie back to the team. Make sure she's warm, fed, and guarded." "But Sheriff, that's an order." Miller nodded, scooping Ellie gently into his arms. She clung to him like a frightened kitten. Harlow and Ross pressed deeper into the forest. The moonlight struggled to break through the dense canopy. Twigs snapped underfoot. The creek roared faintly somewhere ahead. Then Ross froze. "Sheriff, look." Harlow followed his gaze. Boot prints, deep, recent, leading down a slope towards the water. But something else caught his eye. A dragging trail, like someone pulling weight. "A child," Harlow muttered. "Or 2. Ross nodded grimly. "Briggs is close." They moved faster now, breath puffing in harsh clouds. The creek's sound grew louder, rushing water smashing against rocks. Then the smell hit them. Damp earth, rust, mold, and something colder, something wrong. Harlow lifted his flashlight. There it was, a door carved into the ground, hidden beneath tangled roots and leaves. The dark place. Ross swore under his breath. That bastard. Harlow pushed forward slowly, hand on his gun. "Cover me." Ross raised his weapon. Harlow placed his hand on the hatch. Cold. Old. Used far too many times. He lifted it slowly. The hinges creaked like dying metal. A damp, suffocating odor blasted upward. And then, a voice. Not Briggs. A child. Crying. Soft. Muffled. Close. "Ben," Harlow whispered. "Kara." He dropped inside without hesitation, flashlight swinging wildly as he descended crude wooden steps. The cellar smelled of mildew and fear. Dirt walls, no windows, barely enough space to stand upright. And in the corner, two small shapes. Ben, dirt-smeared cheeks streaked with tears. And beside him, a baby girl, Kara, cheeks flushed from crying, tiny fingers curled around her brother's shirt. "Sheriff," choked Ross behind him. "My God!" Harlow rushed to the children, heart shattering. "It's okay," he whispered, voice shaking. "Sweetheart, we're here to help. You're safe now." Ben flinched at first, then hurled himself into the sheriff's arms with a sob so raw it sliced through the darkness. Harlow gathered the baby gently, holding her close. Ross whispered, voice trembling, "Sheriff, where the hell is Briggs?" As if an answer, a branch snapped above the cellar. Heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate. Then a voice, cold, too calm. "You shouldn't have touched my things, Sheriff." Ben whimpered. Kara whimpered. Ross raised his gun sharply. "Briggs, show yourself!" A low chuckle vibrated through the night air. "You think you're the first ones who tried to find them? People always look, always fail." Harlow tightened his grip on the children. "Put your weapon down, or I swear—" "You swear," Briggs laughed. "Sheriff, you have no idea what I swear." The hatch slammed shut. Darkness swallowed the cellar. Ben screamed. Kara wailed. Ross cursed violently. And Harlow felt the cold realization settle into his bones. Briggs didn't run. He waited. And now he had them trapped underground, in his world. And nowhere was darker than the place Briggs called home.
Darkness settled over the cellar like a living thing. Ben's cries echoed against the dirt walls, sharp and ragged. The baby's wails trembled in the heavy air. Sheriff Harlow's flashlight flickered once, then steadied, a lone star in a sunless world. "Ross," he said quietly, "check the hatch." Ross rushed up the steps, boots thudding on the wooden rungs. He shoved at the heavy wooden door above, shoulders straining. It didn't budge. He tried again, harder. Mud showered down as the hinges groaned, but refused to give. "He blocked it," Ross said through gritted teeth, "jammed something on top." Harlow expected as much. Briggs was deliberate, methodical. Once he'd made his move, nothing was left to chance. The sheriff kept his voice steady. "Ross, keep your light up. We're not panicking." Ross exhaled shakily, nodding, even though Harlow could barely see him. Harlow crouched beside Ben and Kara. "They're not gonna hurt you," he whispered. "I won't let anything happen. Not now." Kara hiccuped, tiny chest rising and falling too fast. Ben clung to Harlow's sleeve with a strength born from fear and exhaustion. "Did he come back?" Ben asked, voice trembling. "He said he would if we ever made noise." "You're allowed to make noise now," Harlow said firmly. "You've already done the brave part. You survived. Ellie survived. And now we're going to get you out of here." But inside, the sheriff felt a weight he hadn't known since the day he'd failed to save his own brother from drowning at age 13. A guilt carved so deep, he'd spent decades burying it under badges, oaths, and long nights. Ross moved back down the cellar steps. "Sheriff, we need comms. Radio isn't reaching through this dirt. We're cut off." Harlow nodded grimly. "We go up together. Brace the hatch with our shoulders. 3..." A sound interrupted him. Footsteps above. Slow. Heavy. Purposeful. Briggs. Harlow motioned sharply to Ross. "Lights off." Ross clicked his flashlight dark. The children stiffened but didn't scream. Instinct told them to be silent. Through the cracks around the hatch, the faintest sliver of moonlight filtered down. Dust drifted gently.
Then a shadow passed over them. Briggs's voice seeped through the wood. "Sheriff Harlow, you're a stubborn man." Harlow's hand hovered near his holster, though he knew the gun was useless against a ceiling. "You're not walking away from this," he said low. "Oh, I will," Briggs replied calmly. "I always do." Ross stepped forward. "Where the hell are you going, Briggs?" "Somewhere quiet," Briggs said. "Somewhere I can think." A metallic scrape followed, something heavy dragging, or perhaps being placed. Then the unmistakable clatter of a padlock being secured. Harlow's blood ran ice cold. "You lock us in, and I swear to God—" But Briggs cut him off. "You broke into my home. Now I'll bury you in it." His footsteps retreated slowly, deliberately, until they faded entirely. Silence swallowed the cellar again. Ross exhaled. "We have to move, now." Harlow flicked his flashlight back on. The cellar swam into view, the dirt walls, the low ceiling, the scraps of child-sized blankets, the marks on the ground where tiny hands had clawed the earth in hopeless attempts to escape. He couldn't leave these kids in here 1 minute longer than necessary. Harlow knelt directly under the hatch. "Ross, we're hit with a choice. We push up and pray he didn't reinforce it with anything too heavy, or we find a way through these walls." Ross ran a hand along the packed dirt. "If we start digging, we'll collapse this whole place. It's not stable." Harlow nodded. "Then up it is." He lifted Kara into Ross's arms. "Hold her," he whispered. "Keep her close." Then he took Ben's hand. "Kiddo, I'm gonna need you to stand behind us, far as you can, back against the wall." Ben sniffled but obeyed, pulling the blanket around his shoulders for warmth. Harlow steadied himself beneath the hatch, legs planted, jaw set. Ross braced beside him. "On 3, he said quietly. 1, 2, 3. They shoved upward with everything they had. The hatch groaned, but didn't give. They pushed again. This time, Harlow felt something shift, but not the hatch. His shoulder. Pain flared sharp and hot. He clenched his teeth, pushing harder. Ross grunted, sweat beading down his forehead. Something's on top, logs maybe, or a board, something he dragged over. Harlow knew exactly what Briggs had done. He'd buried the hatch beneath a fallen tree trunk. He'd planned this trap long before tonight. They tried again. Nothing. Ross stepped back, panting. "Sheriff, it's not budging." Harlow remained still for a long moment, chest heaving. Ben's tiny voice broke the silence. "Are we gonna die down here?" Ross closed his eyes. Harlow turned towards him slowly. "No, not a chance." "But he locked it. He said nobody ever gets out." "Briggs says a lot of things, doesn't make any of them true." He forced himself to stand straighter, Harlow's shoulder throbbing. "We find another way," he said quietly. "There's always another way." Ross frowned. "Sheriff, there isn't another way. This place is a box." "No," Harlow said slowly. "It's not." He moved his flashlight across the walls again, slower this time, less like a cop searching a room, and more like a man rereading a map he'd once forgotten. He found it near the base of the far wall. An indentation. A seam. Barely noticeable. A place where the dirt color changed by a shade. "Ross," he said quietly, "bring your light." Ross crouched beside him. "What am I looking at?" Harlow touched the indented patch of wall. The soil crumbled beneath his fingers in a way the rest didn't. "Kids didn't claw at this," he murmured. "This was dug outward." "You think Briggs used this tunnel?" Ross whispered, eyes widening. Harlow nodded. "He buried the hatch because he expected us to go up. He thinks down here is a tomb." "So you're saying," Harlow said and hinted, "he has another entry or escape route, probably camouflaged, used it to sneak in and out without anyone noticing. And you think it's still open?" "For his sake," Harlow growled, "it better be." They began clearing the wall with their hands, dirt flying, arms shaking. It was slow, exhausting work, but purposeful. Ben crawled closer. "Can I help?" Harlow wiped a hand across the boy's cheek. "You already helped, son. You survived long enough for us to find you." As they dug, the air grew colder. Dampness seeped from the widening hole. Ross's light caught something. "Sheriff, there's air movement." Harlow leaned closer. A faint draft kissed his face. Fresh, clean, outside air. "We found it," Harlow whispered. "Keep going." Minutes stretched, dirt piled around their knees, their hands throbbed. Harlow's injured shoulder screamed every time he reached forward. But then, light. Faint, moon gray, filtering through the last thin layer of dirt. Ross punched through it with one final shove. Cool night air flooded the cellar like salvation. Ben gasped, "We're getting out!" Harlow grabbed the walls of the hole, widening enough for the children to slip through. "You first, Ben, then Ross takes Kara through." Ross nodded, lifting the baby carefully. Ben crawled into the opening. Ross followed, pushing Kara gently through ahead of him. Harlow remained for a moment, listening to the night sounds through the hole, the creak, the wind, even the distant chatter of deputies. They weren't far. Briggs had trapped them a mere 50 yards from rescue. Coward. Monster. Harlow crawled through last, dragging himself into the open air. The moon gleamed on his face like a benediction. Ross stood beside him, holding Kara close while keeping Ben tucked under one arm. "Sheriff, Briggs is still out here." Harlow stepped forward slowly, hand tightening on his gun. He scanned the dark woods. Every shadow felt alive. He wasn't done, not until Briggs was in cuffs or in the ground. "Ross," he said, voice firm, "get these kids to safety. Now, don't look back." Ross hesitated. "And you?" Harlow stepped forward slowly, hand tightening on his gun. "I'll deal with Briggs." The night swallowed his silhouette as he walked deeper into the forest, alone, hunting a man who only knew darkness. The fallout had begun, and the reckoning would follow.
The woods felt different now. Not just dark, but listening. Every rustle, every shift in the wind carried a tension that pressed against Sheriff Harlow's ribs like a hand squeezing too hard. He moved carefully over the uneven ground, his boots sinking into patches of soft earth still damp from yesterday's storm. Above him, thin clouds drifted past the moon, throwing shifting silver onto the roots and brush. Briggs was close. Harlow didn't need to see him, didn't need footprints or broken twigs, didn't even need Rex's nose. Some predators left trails you could sense without looking. He paused behind a large oak, listening. The wind whispered through the branches. A distant owl hooted. But beneath that, beneath the normal night, there was something else. Breathing. Ragged, slow, coming from the right. Harlow adjusted his grip on his gun, though his shoulders screamed from the earlier strain. He took a breath, steadying the tremor in his arm. Briggs knew the woods better than anyone. He'd hunted here since he was a kid, and he'd been hunting something, someone, long before Ben and Kara were even born. A twig snapped behind him. Harlow spun, gun raised. Nothing. Just shadows. Too many shadows. Briggs was toying with him. "Come on out," Harlow said, voice steady. "You've lost." Silence answered. Then a low chuckle drifted between the trees. "Lost? No, Sheriff. I finally evened the score." Harlow turned in the direction of the voice, muscles coiled. "You caged children, Briggs. You buried a boy alive. You don't get to talk about scores." "Oh, I do." Briggs's voice was airy, almost conversational. "You think this is about some kid, some crying mess that landed in my woods? You kidnapped them." "I rescued them," Briggs snapped, suddenly sharp. "From useless parents, from a world that forgets them. I gave them peace, a quiet place, a safe place." Harlow stepped deeper into the trees, voice lowering. "You didn't save them. You hid them. You hurt them. You terrified them." Briggs didn't deny it. Instead, he said,
You broke something tonight, something I built over years. Harlow exhaled slowly. Good. A soft rustle came from behind a cluster of ferns. Harlow moved toward it, sensing he was being herded, not towards Briggs, but away from something else. There was a faint glimmer on the ground. Metal. A tripwire. Harlow froze mid-step. Close. Too close. He slowly backed away from it, breath steady. Briggs may have been sick, but he was no fool. A man who lived off the grid for a decade learned to make traps the same way other men learned to make breakfast. From somewhere just beyond the tree line, Briggs spoke again, voice colder than before. You know, Sheriff, I watched you for a long time walk your angry little patrols, pretend you were protecting people, pretend you were better than your father. Harlow's jaw clenched. Briggs continued. Everyone knows what he did. Everyone remembers, and you've spent your whole damn life trying to rewrite the ending. Harlow forced himself not to react. Briggs thrived on reactions. You done? He asked calmly. Oh, not even close. The woods shifted. A breeze carried the scent of smoke, faint but unmistakable. Harlow's eyes widened. Smoke? From behind him? Harlow turned sharply. A thin column curled upward through the trees. Not a campfire, not a cigarette. Something bigger, something spreading. Briggs had lit the forest. Harlow moved fast, weaving between trees, ignoring the burn in his shoulder. Flames licked the bases of dry brush, catching on brittle pine needles. The fire was small now, but it was spreading in every direction. You're insane, Harlow shouted into the darkness. Briggs's voice floated back. You like hunting me, Sheriff? Let's make it a little more interesting. The fire crackled, glowing brighter. Harlow realized what Briggs was doing. He was funneling him. Smoke clouding the left, flames blocking the right, tripwire behind, and Briggs waiting somewhere ahead. He's forcing a path, a kill path. Harlow pressed his back against a tree, thinking quickly. His body felt heavy, exhaustion weighing down his limbs, but instinct sharpened everything. He couldn't let Briggs corner him, couldn't let him escape either. He remembered Ross's last words. Briggs is still out here. Yes, and he wasn't planning to run. Harlow took a deep breath, tasted ash, and plunged forward. He kept low, shielding his mouth with his sleeve as he pushed through a curtain of smoke. Flames snapped close enough to warm his cheek. In the distance, a branch snapped under someone's weight. Harlow honed in on the sound. Briggs was moving fast now, away from the fire line, but not fleeing, guiding the chase. Sheriff or prey? That was the question buried under every step. Harlow wasn't prey. He crept through a narrow corridor of trees and emerged in a small clearing, a crescent of moonlight bathing the ground. There, on the far side, stood Briggs, calm, still, smiling faintly. He held a long hunting knife in one hand. Its blade reflected the moon in a cold shimmer. You made it, Briggs said softly. Didn't think you had it in you. Harlow raised his gun. Drop it. Briggs tilted his head. Shoot me if you want, but we both know. Harlow fired. The bullet ripped through the air, straight towards Briggs' chest, except Briggs moved at the last second, like he'd been waiting for the shot. The bullet grazed his arm, tearing fabric, but didn't drop him. Instead, he surged forward, knife flashing. Harlow sidestepped just in time, swinging the butt of his gun at Briggs's wrist. The blade clattered to the ground. Briggs lunged again, not for the knife, but straight for Harlow's injured shoulder. Pain exploded white-hot as Briggs slammed into it. Harlow fell backward, breath knocked from his lungs. The ground hit hard. Briggs landed on top of him, forearm pressing against Harlow's throat, squeezing. You think you can save them? You can't even save yourself. Harlow clawed at Briggs's arm, legs kicking for leverage, vision tunneling. Air thinned, the world dimmed around the edges. But then, a memory cut through the fading dark. Then, eyes wide, face dirty, voice trembling. Are we gonna die down here? And Harlow had said, not a chance. He would not let this be the lie that killed him. With a surge of strength, pulled from somewhere deep, somewhere primal, Harlow twisted his body and slammed his elbow into Briggs's ribs. Briggs grunted, but didn't loosen his hold. Harlow tried again, harder. This time, Briggs reeled, gripping faltering. Harlow seized the moment, rolling them both. The sheriff ended up on top, driving his knee into Briggs's sternum. Briggs snarled. "You should have stayed down." He reached for the knife beside them. Harlow saw the movement too late. Briggs grabbed the blade. He swung. Harlow ducked, felt the knife skim past his ear. His hand shot out and grabbed Briggs's wrist, the blade inches from his throat. They struggled, muscles trembling, dirt flying beneath them. "I'm not dying in these woods," Harlow growled. Briggs's eyes gleamed. "Everyone dies in these woods." Harlow shifted his weight, forcing Briggs's hand away from his throat, inch by inch, until the sheriff's other hand found the heavy flashlight on his belt. With a final burst of strength, Harlow swung the flashlight at Briggs's temple with a sickening thud. Briggs's body went limp. For a long moment, Harlow knelt there, chest heaving, the knife shaking in Briggs's slack grip. Flames crackled somewhere distant, smoke drifted low, the air trembled with the last echoes of violence. Then, slowly, Briggs exhaled. Alive, barely, but beaten. Harlow pressed a hand to his own shoulder, wincing as pain flared. His vision blurred, but steadied. In the distance, lights flickered through the trees. Flashlights, voices, deputies. Ross's shout cut through the smoke. "Sheriff! Sheriff!" Harlow didn't answer. Not yet. He stared down at the unconscious man beneath him, the monster who'd lived in the shadows for years, unnoticed, unchecked, unbroken, until tonight. Harlow finally stood, knees unsteady, and called out hoarsely, "Over here!" The woods came alive with movement as deputies rushed toward him. Ross reached his side first, eyes wide, breath ragged. "Sheriff, Jesus, what happened?" Harlow looked past him, toward the flickering fire line in the dark path Briggs had used for years. "He's done," Harlow said quietly. "It's over." But even as the deputies cuffed Briggs and lifted him from the dirt, Harlow felt something lingering, something unfinished. The woods still felt restless, like they were holding one more secret in their silent, waiting shadows.
The sirens faded into the distance, swallowed by the thick woods as deputies hauled Briggs toward the path leading back to the cruisers. Flashlights cut sharp beams through the darkness, and the fire brigade rushed past Harlow, stamping out creeping flames before they could swallow the forest whole. Sheriff Harlow stood alone near the clearing, breathing steady but shallow, watching the last flicker of orange glow die beneath blankets of smoke and shadow. It should have been over, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still moving out there, watching, waiting. Ross jogged back to him, jacket soaked with sweat and smoke. "Sheriff, EMTs want to check your shoulder. You're bleeding through your shirt." "I'm aware," Harlow said quietly. Ross frowned. "Then let's go." "In a minute." Ross hesitated, reading the stiff set of Harlow's jaw, then nodded and stepped away, giving him space. The woods felt too quiet now, too hollow. Harlow replayed the fight in his mind, Briggs's eyes, wild and glassy, the rage, the conviction, the certainty that he wasn't done, or that someone else wasn't done. That's what unsettled Harlow the most. Briggs had been willing to die out here to protect a secret the woods still held, a secret Harlow wasn't sure they were ready to face. A breeze stirred overhead, rattling the branches in a whisper that lifted the hair on the back of his neck. He slid his good hand along the trunk of the nearest tree, an old, towering oak, feeling its deep grooves beneath his fingertips, scars from storms and time. But one line felt different, fresher, a long, deliberate cut not made by weather or accident, a notch, a mark. Harlow traced it again, brown knitting. It wasn't random, it had purpose, direction. He pulled out his flashlight and angled it higher. Another mark. Then another. A series of symbols carved into the tree trunk, faint but intentional. He stepped closer, lifting the light. There were 3. A circle, a slash, a crooked Y shape. His stomach dropped.
He'd seen these symbols before, back when he was a rookie, before the disappearance of that boy, before Briggs vanished into the woods. They were reported near an old campsite. Graffiti maybe, but no one paid attention. The case had gone cold. Now, here they were again, fresh. Harlow's breath thinned. This wasn't Briggs's work. Briggs carved simple lines, crude traps, nothing symbolic, nothing coded. This was someone else. Someone still out there. A branch snapped behind him. Harlow whirled around, gun raised, ignoring the pain that shot through his shoulder, but there was nothing in the dark except drifting smoke. His pulse hammered. Maybe his nerves were frayed. Maybe exhaustion played tricks. Maybe. But he'd survived 30 years in law enforcement by trusting instincts, not maybes, and his instincts were shouting now. He holstered his gun slowly and moved toward the tree again, crouching to inspect the ground. The dirt was disturbed, pine needles brushed aside. A faint footprint, no bigger than a child's, was pressed into the soil beside the old roots. But it wasn't Ben's or Kara's. This one was older. Rainfall had softened the edges, but it was still visible. A small shoe, light tread. Someone had been here before the kids. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who used the woods like a second skin. Harlow swallowed hard. How long had this been happening? Ross called out from the path. "Sheriff, they need you down here. Ben keeps asking for you." That snapped him out of his haze. Ben. Kara. They were the priority. He took one last look at the carvings before turning away. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But he'd figure it out in daylight. Ben sat wrapped in 2 emergency blankets, tiny fingers gripping the edges like they anchored him to earth. Kara leaned against him, pale but steady, her eyes never leaving the sheriff as he approached. Deputies stepped back, making space. Harlow crouched beside them, slowly because of his shoulder, and forced a small, reassuring smile. "You two did more tonight than most adults ever could." Ben blinked up at him. "You came back," he whispered. "Of course I did." The boy's chin trembled. I thought you'd die." Harlow shook his head. "Not a chance." Ben nodded, believing him with the kind of faith only children carried. Kara's gaze flicked to his arm. "Your shirt is red." Harlow looked down, startled by how much blood had seeped through. "Just a scratch." She arched a skeptical eyebrow. Even traumatized, Kara had no patience for lies. He raised a hand in surrender. "A deep scratch." She nodded once, accepting that. Ben shifted nervously. "Is he gone, the man?" Harlow hesitated. He wouldn't lie to them. "He's in custody," he said, "and he won't hurt you again." Ben exhaled shakily. But Kara wasn't satisfied. "What about the other one?" Harlow's breath stilled. "What other one?" he asked carefully. Kara looked at him like he was missing something obvious. "The person who left food by the tree." "What tree?" Ben pointed back toward the darker part of the woods. "The one with the shapes on it." A chill slid down Harlow's spine. "I thought it was the bad man," Ben continued, "but the shoes were different." He frowned. "Small." "How small?" Harlow asked. Kara raised her palm and hovered above the ground. "Like our size." Harlow felt the world tilt. Another child? A partner? A survivor? Or someone still trapped in a nightmare Briggs didn't act alone to create? Ross approached slowly, overhearing the last part. "Sheriff, what does that mean?" Harlow stood, ignoring the throb in his shoulder. He stared toward the dark line of trees, toward the marks carved deep in bark and memory, and felt the night grow heavier. "It means," he said quietly, "we've only solved half the case." Ross stiffened. Deputies exchanged uneasy looks. Ben and Kara watched with wide, fearful eyes. "What do we do now?" Ross asked. Harlow's gaze stayed fixed on the woods. "We don't sleep, we don't rest, and we don't close this file." He inhaled the cold air, letting the truth settle deep in his bones. "Tonight," he said, "we caught the man who stole 2 children." His jaw tightened. "But someone else has been watching this forest for years." Ross swallowed hard. "Sheriff, who?" Harlow finally turned, eyes dark, voice low, certain. The one we were never supposed to find. The wind shifted, colder than before. The woods creaked. Somewhere far back in the trees, a faint crunch sounded, too soft for a human, too deliberate for an animal. Harlow's blood ran cold. The forest wasn't done with them, not even close. "Gear up," he said. "We go back in at dawn." And as the deputies moved with renewed purpose, Harlow looked once more into the shadowed tree line, a place that had swallowed secrets for years. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin again. But tonight, the woods simply waited.
Dawn crawled over Briar Ridge Woods like a reluctant confession, gray light slowly peeling back the curtain of night. Sheriff Harlow stood at the edge of the tree line, coffee steaming from the tin cup in his hand, though he hadn't taken a single sip. His shoulder throbbed under the bandage. He could still feel the phantom weight of Briggs's blade, but that wasn't what kept him awake all night. It was the symbols. The carved tree, the small footprint, the food left behind, the whispered statement from Ben. The shoes were small. Someone else had been out there. Someone Briggs didn't control. Someone Briggs might have feared. Ross approached from behind, carrying a stack of photos. "Sheriff, you need to see these." Harlow took the pictures, flipping through them one by one. They were photos the deputies took last night, of the mark carved into the tree, the circle, the slash, the crooked Y. Harlow's jaw locked. Ross shifted uneasily. Forensics confirmed those markings aren't random. They're identical to the ones found 5 years ago at that abandoned campsite off the East Ridge. Harlow stared into the woods. 5 years ago, the missing girl. Ross nodded. Ellie Harper, 8 years old. She vanished on a hiking trip with her father. They found the campsite, but no sign of her. "That case nearly broke this county," Harlow whispered. "And now," Ross said grimly, "those same symbols show up here." The woods suddenly felt colder. Behind them, Kara and Ben sat in a deputy's SUV eating warm breakfast sandwiches. The kids looked exhausted, eyes ringed with shadows, but they were safe, together, healing. Harlow clung to that small victory, but there was no ignoring the truth settling like frost in his bones. The story wasn't finished. He handed the photos back. "Gather the team, we go in slow, methodical, no one strays alone." Ross nodded and jogged off. Harlow stepped forward, one boot sinking into the soft earth of the woods. The trees whispered overhead, branches swaying gently, as if warning him back. But he didn't stop. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. No birds, no squirrels, no wind. Just the steady crunch of boots and the distant hum of radios. "Sheriff," Ross called, jogging up the incline. "We found something." Harlow followed Ross to a small ridge where deputies knelt around a hollow in the ground. The opening was tight, camouflaged with leaves and brush. Someone had lived here recently. Inside lay a threadbare blanket, a cracked water bottle, and a pair of tiny shoes, mud-stained, too small for any adult. Children's shoes. Harlow felt a slow ache tighten in his chest. Ross pointed to the dirt. "Tracks lead deeper. Whoever this is, they've been hiding out for years." Harlow crouched slowly. Someone survived these woods alone. "And they were watching Briggs," Ross said, "not helping him, not running from him either." A shadow crossed overhead, sending a shiver through the branches. Harlow stood, gaze scanning the dark corridor of trees. Someone who learned the forest better than he did. Ross kicked lightly at the dirt. "You think it's the Harper girl?" Harlow didn't answer. Hope was dangerous. Hope clouded judgment, but the possibility burned like an ember he couldn't stamp out. "Let's move," he said gruffly. 2 hours later, they found the next sign. A ribbon. Blue. Faded. Frayed at the edge from weather. Harlow plucked it carefully from the branch it had been tied to. "This is a child's hair ribbon." Ross swallowed. Ellie's case file said she was wearing a blue ribbon when she disappeared.
The forest pressed in around them, silent and suffocating. Harlow turned the ribbon in his fingers. If Ellie Harper had survived 5 years in these woods, if she had been the one leaving food, if she had been watching, why hadn't she come forward? Unless she was scared of the same monster the kids feared. Not Briggs, something else, someone else. They reached a clearing by mid-afternoon, sunlight slicing through the canopy like broken glass. The ground was scattered with pine needles and ash from an old fire pit. Not Briggs's camp. This one was smaller, cleaner. A child's camp. A makeshift shelter built from branches and a weathered tarp sat tucked against the rock wall. The structure was surprisingly sturdy, carefully built, intelligently designed. "Sheriff?" a deputy whispered, pointing. "Look." Harlow followed the line of his finger. There she was, a girl, barely more than a shadow against the rock. Thin, pale, hair tangled, clothes torn and patched in places. Her eyes, wide, wary, locked onto Harlow. She looked exactly like the photos from 5 years ago, only older, harder, wilder. "Ellie," Harlow said softly, voice cracking. The girl flinched at the name. Ross whispered, "Holy God, she's alive!" Harlow stepped forward slowly, lowering himself to one knee. "Ellie Harper, sweetheart, we're here to take you home." Her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. "Safe," Harlow whispered. "You're safe now. Briggs is in custody. He can't hurt you or anyone else ever again." She swallowed hard. Then she shook her head. "No," she whispered, voice hoarse. "No what?" Her eyes darted to the woods behind them. "Not him." Ross tensed. "Then who?" The girl stepped forward just enough that the sunlight revealed the bruises around her wrist, fresh ones. She whispered one word, barely audible. "Someone else." A shadow snapped behind them. Harlow spun around. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in shadow, tall, thin, unmoving, watching them. His voice slid out like cold metal. "Step away from the girl." Every deputy raised their weapon in a single motion. "Ellie," Harlow murmured, "who is that?" The girl shook her head violently, tears spilling. "That's the man who took me." Harlow's blood iced. Not Briggs, not a ghost from the past. A second predator, one who had hidden in the woods for years undetected, one who watched Briggs take children so he could choose which ones to keep, one who carved symbols into trees as warnings or claims. Harlow raised his voice, sharp and unwavering. "This ends now." The figure tilted his head. "No," he said quietly, "it only ends with her." Ellie screamed, "Run!" But the deputy surged forward before she could move. The man lunged into the brush with inhuman speed, disappearing into the trees like smoke. Chaos erupted, shouts, footsteps pounding, branches snapping. "Fan out," Harlow commanded. "Do not lose him." The woods exploded with motion as deputies stormed after the fleeing figure. Harlow grabbed Ross. "Keep her safe. Don't let her out of your sight." Ross nodded fiercely and pulled Ellie behind him. Then Harlow ran. His shoulders screamed, his lungs burned, but he didn't stop. Not now, not with another monster loose, not with 5 years of nightmares burning in that girl's eyes. He tore through the forest, heart pounding, branches whipping his face as he pushed deeper and deeper after the vanishing shadow. And for the first time since the case began, he understood the truth. Briggs wasn't the mastermind. He wasn't the beginning. He was just the bait, a tool, a distraction. The real danger was still out there, waiting, watching, hunting. And this time, the woods weren't whispering. They were warning. The final truth wasn't what they'd expected. It was worse, much worse. And as Harlow plunged into the dark, he knew one thing. This case wasn't ending. It was just beginning.